This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening, I'm Bateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Record-breaking rain unleashes deadly flooding on the eastern outskirts of Tokyo. At least 8 people are dead, with homes and roads submerged, power knocked out, and thousands left stranded. Also, a race against rising waters in central China after heavy rains triggered a levee breach in Henan. Crews are working around the clock with more than 2,000 residents evacuated. Now, China calls Taiwan's annual military drills a wasteful charade as 10 days of exercises wrap up. The war games tested the island's defenses against a possible attack. Also, Japan weighs possible action against Russia after President Putin visited a disputed island claimed by Tokyo, while it summoned Moscow's ambassador with fresh sanctions reportedly on the table. And a Chinese shipping line set to launch the first regular container service through the Arctic, trailblazing a shortcut route between Asia and Europe. Also tonight, China's vast domestic market has powered the rise of its e-bike industry. So why are manufacturers increasingly looking overseas for growth? Plus, an international turnout for next weekend's World Humanoid Robot Games, with more than 2,000 robots from 16 countries set to compete in Beijing. At least 8 people are dead after record-breaking rainfall triggered widespread flooding in Japan's Chiba prefecture. 4 others are said to be injured. Well, the downpour flooded homes, roads, and railways, knocked out power, and stranded thousands of people. More than 360 millimeters of rain fell in the region east of Tokyo in just 24 hours. The weather agency has since downgraded its unprecedented highest rain warning for parts of the prefecture. Mud and floodwater covered roads, homes, cars, and parts of railway tracks. Homes were flooded, while nearly 230,000 residents were advised to seek shelter. Around 24,000 households remain without power. Now, the flooding brought transport across the region to a standstill. Around 7,000 people were stranded overnight at Narita Airport after trains serving the key international hub were suspended. Some services resumed this morning, but with delays. Flights are operating normally.
着陸時は窓から見ると雨は降っていたんですけど、そんなに豪雨っていう状況ではなかったですね。で、到着して皆さんも別にそんなにスタックしてるとは思ってなかったと思います。
Well, I didn't see this floor, to be honest, but the higher one was full of people sleeping everywhere. On every corner of the floor.
The intensity of the rain forced the closure of major highways, forcing drivers onto alternative routes, leading to traffic jams. At Chiba Station, flood water poured down an escalator as well as steps at a popular shopping mall. Now, many spent the night in temporary shelters. More than 200 evacuation centers were opened across 4 prefectures. About 1,800 took refuge inside the Chiba prefectural government headquarters. Now, soldiers from Japan's self-defense forces have been sent in to help with rescue and relief operations. Chiba's governor says that saving lives remains the priority. While rains appear to ease this morning, more downpours are forecast, and officials are warning of landslides, flooding, and swollen rivers across Chiba and elsewhere in the Kanto region, including Tokyo. The full extent of the damage is still being assessed. Now, flood control and rescue efforts are continuing around the clock in central China after extreme rainfall linked to Typhoon Dolphin caused a levee breach along the Beiru River in Henan province. Well, the incident happened on Wednesday evening in Yuxi village in Jiaxian County, with a gap initially measuring more than 40 meters wide. Authorities evacuated more than 2,000 residents before Thursday. No casualties or trapped residents were reported. More than 2,800 personnel have joined the emergency response, moving materials by land and water to plug the gap. By today, crews began pumping concrete directly into the breach. More than 20 meters had been sealed by this morning. The rescue effort comes as Beijing released nearly $12 million for flood and geological disaster relief. These funds will support emergency operations in the provinces of Henan, Hubei, and Anhui. They were hit by heavy rain and flooding brought about by the remnants of Typhoon Dolphin. Authorities say that last month's natural disasters have caused economic losses of nearly $9 billion, and more than 300 people are either dead or missing. Taiwan has concluded its biggest annual military exercise, Han Kuang, as it continues to strengthen its defenses amid growing pressure from China. Now, this year's drills reflected some of the lessons Taiwan has been learning from recent conflicts around the world and showed just how the island is changing the way it prepares for a possible attack. CNA's Taiwan senior correspondent Victoria Jen with this report.
Taiwan has wrapped up its annual Han Kuang military drills after 10 days and 9 nights of exercises. This year, the focus was not just on how Taiwan's military would fight in a war. It was also about how the island would keep going. Troops practiced moving quickly around the island, protecting key facilities and keeping supplies moving. There was also more use of drones and other new technology. This year, ordinary people also had a bigger role. Air raid drills were held across Taiwan. People were told to take shelter, while authorities tested evacuation and emergency response processes. In some areas, mobile internet was even slowed down to show that could happen if communications were disrupted during a conflict.
I think that the design of Han Kuang 42nd particularly involve the psychological preparedness of our public in wartime situation. And I commend the Ministry of Defense and other government agencies that are working together to inform our citizens better prepare for a harsh situation if a war occurred.
And that may be one of the main messages from this year's Han Kuang exercises. Taiwan wants its military to be ready, but it also wants ordinary people to understand what could happen and know what to do if a crisis becomes real. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
North Korea has warned of a new level of deterrence ahead of scheduled annual joint military drills between the U.S. and South Korea. Pyongyang did not specify its potential response to alleged threats, but says that the joint exercises are more provocative this year. Pyongyang has repeatedly referred to such exercises as rehearsal for war and says it will express its stance more clearly against what it perceives as threats and challenges. North Korea has a history of conducting missile launches ahead of these military exercises and around significant dates. On Wednesday, it fired a ballistic missile from its east coast, less than a week after its previous launch. The joint U.S.-South Korean drills begin next Monday and will last 11 days. It will involve live fire exercises, similar to previous years. Washington and Seoul have always contended that the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises are defensive in nature. Well, the Public Affairs Director for the Combined Forces Command, United Nations Command, and U.S. Forces Korea said that this year's exercise will reflect the changing character of war that includes growing use of unmanned systems, electronic warfare, as well as the deployment of North Korean soldiers to Russia. Japan is weighing new measures against Russia after President Vladimir Putin's visit to a disputed island. Tokyo says that it is considering its next steps with an additional sanction against Moscow, reportedly among the options. Mr. Putin traveled to the island at the tip of the Kurils chain called Iturup in Russia yesterday. Footage released by the Kremlin showed him touring a fish processing plant, a hospital, and a school. It marks the first trip there by a Russian president since 2010. Japan, which recognizes the island as part of its northern territories, responded by summoning Russia's ambassador to lodge a strong protest. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi called Mr. Putin's visit unacceptable, insisting that the islands are Japanese territory under history and international law. Well, Moscow rejected the protest, calling the statements made by Japan as unfounded. Russia's embassy in Japan also said that Mr. Putin's visit was not a matter for discussion with other countries. The United Nations urged both sides to show restraint and avoid further escalation. Meanwhile, the United States says that it recognizes Japan's sovereignty over islands visited by Mr. Putin. U.S. Ambassador to Japan, George Glass, says that Washington remains firm in its support for Tokyo and opposes any action that could undermine peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. The territorial dispute dates all the way back to 1945, when Soviet forces seized the 4 islands at the end of World War II. The territorial row has kept Japan and Russia from signing a formal post-war peace treaty. Talks broke down in 2022 after Japan joined Western sanctions against Moscow over the war in Ukraine. Well, the territorial dispute is just one example of how the legacy of World War II continues to impact diplomacy today. And we'll be getting more insights into these historical tensions when we speak with Alexis Dudden from the University of Connecticut later this hour. Beijing has rejected accusations of spying on New Zealand. It was reacting to an annual threat report that singled out China as New Zealand's most active foreign interference actor. The Chinese embassy says the assessment by New Zealand's intelligence agency is groundless and fabricated out of thin air. It says it reflects the reluctance of unnamed forces, both within and outside New Zealand, to see ties grow. The Chinese embassy statement comes weeks after it raised an official complaint in response to New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters telling a Chinese-born lawmaker to, quote, go back to their own country. The New Zealand Spy Agency's report released yesterday identifies China as the only country detected conducting espionage at scale. And it warns that Beijing's national security laws could compel individuals and businesses to hand over data, intellectual property, or system access. But Wellington cautioned that the findings should not prevent trade or collaboration with Chinese entities, urging instead an eyes-wide-open approach to overseas business and research ties. A Philippine President, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., says that Manila is making progress in talks with China over potential joint energy exploration. Now, his comment comes amid ongoing tensions between the two countries over disputed territory in the South China Sea. Mr. Marcos says that concerns over oil and gas supplies have given new urgency to ongoing discussions with Beijing. The Philippines has faced energy supply disruptions linked to the conflict in the Middle East, and that led to Mr. Marcos declaring a national energy emergency in March. Talks with Beijing over joint energy exploration in the South China Sea are not new. Negotiations were terminated in 2022 under former President Rodrigo Duterte. Mr. Marcos reopened the door to negotiations the following year after meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping. Manila's foreign ministry said that initial exchanges had begun with Beijing since March. Time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Preliminary data showing that Incheon's international passenger count has flown past rival airports for the first half of this year. Plus, Japanese tourism suffering from the decline in Chinese visitorship, but the weak yen helping to boost arrivals from elsewhere in the first half of this year. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight, and we've got Clara Lee. It's her first time giving us a business news update on East Asia Tonight. Welcome, Clara.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about this Chinese shipping line that's apparently looking to sail in northern seas. Tell us a bit more in terms of why they're headed that way.
Well, I'll tell you, that's because traffic in the waterways around the Gulf region has become hazardous due to the Middle East conflict. The firm, Sea Legend, is launching the first weekly container service between China and Europe via the Arctic route, making the voyages until October as summer sea ice retreats. Now, the first ship, called Dubai Tower, is due to leave tomorrow evening from Ningbo on China's eastern coast and run along Russia's northern sea route to European ports, including Felixstowe in the UK. Now, Sea Legend says the journey is expected to halve the roughly 40 days on conventional routes. Interest in the Arctic is growing as shipping firms look for alternatives to traditional choke points around the Gulf region. South Korea's Panstar Group is also planning a trial voyage from Busan later this month. It expects the journey to Europe to take about 19 days, roughly half the time of conventional routes through the Suez Canal. For more, we're joined by Simon Heaney. He is a senior manager for container research at Dewey Shipping Consultants. Simon, good to have you on. Now, with the new shipping route, journey time could be cut by half to around 20 days. How attractive would this be to companies looking to ship their goods?
It will be very attractive to a small cohort of shippers that really have high-value cargoes and need that expedited routing option. So they will have to pay a significant premium in terms of their freight rates in order to get on board. And we have to remember that this is relatively small in the grand scheme of the entire Asia to Europe container shipping network. So it is very much a niche, seasonal, premium service that is not going to compete with the traditional routes. And as you say, its marketing is exquisite because clearly there's a lot of heightened disruption currently with the Suez transits and the Cape of Good Hope rerouting. But we have to remember that this Arctic routing also has its own risks too. So it's not for the faint-hearted.
And Simon, the conflict in the Middle East has affected shipping traffic in many of the usual channels, as you mentioned, such as the Strait of Hormuz as well. So how much of this do you think was a factor driving companies to find alternative routes?
I'm really not sure because we have seen, I think, the very first what they call Northern Sea route or the Arctic route for a container ship was undertaken way back in 2018, and since then very little. As you mentioned earlier, Clara, in your intro, interest in the route has grown. We saw some test runs last summer also, and we're seeing more now. So clearly interest is growing, and I think it's more opportunistic. I think these companies such as Sea Legend will have to probably accept some sort of financial loss. They're testing the market to test for demand, to see just exactly how much business there is. But we have to remember, again, I try to reiterate, this is a very small piece of the pie. The Arctic route is limited in the size of the ships that can operate. They have to be limited to the sort of 4,500, which can often be a quarter of the size of the regular ships that sail from China or the Far East to Europe. And also, obviously, they're limited in terms of the amount of months that they can run for. So this is going to have an extremely small slither of the available capacity from Far East to Europe. So it's going to appeal, as I say, to a select number of shippers, and they will have the same problems returning cargoes back from Europe to Asia. So so traditional services are roughly 30% full on the backhaul. So they will have to work out those economics too.
Exactly. And Simon, like you said, this is actually the first container ship to travel along this route was sent by Maersk in 2018. So can you tell us why haven't more container ships used it since then?
I think for the major shipping lines, it's a no-no because the Arctic, first start, they have significantly higher operating costs, as I say, because you need smaller, much more expensive ice-class ships. They have higher fuel consumption. You need that ice-breaking support. But from a major shipping lines perspective, such as a Maersk, an MSC, or someone else like that, one of the top 10 carriers, any sort of environmental damage in this sort of very fragile ecosystem is going to have an enormous public relations disaster. So from a major carrier point of view, most of them have said they are not planning to pursue this route. So there just isn't the willingness from the major shipping lines to go ahead and pursue this option. So it's left to the smaller companies such as Sea Legend to explore it for themselves, which I guess gives them an opportunity to develop their own USP. But again, they'll have to contend with all those same challenging economics.
And Simon, just one quick question before we let you go. Can you tell us what are some of the risks that come with using this new route? Are they geopolitical, physical, or maybe environmental even?
Well, all of the above. So you've got to travel through Russian jurisdiction, so that clearly has geopolitical connections. Operationally, as I said, it's an extremely challenging environment. You have thick ice during the winter, which can slow the vessel down, requires ice breaking support, and if you break down, there just isn't. If there's any incident in that region, there is very little support available to you on hand. So yeah, it has all of the above. So as I say, whilst they're using the disruption that exists on traditional routes as a great marketing tool for this Arctic route is certainly not without its own risks.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. That was Simon Heaney, Senior Manager for Container Research at Dury Shipping Consultants. Washington's move to impose tariffs of up to 100% on some drone imports and components, eliciting a response from China. The Chinese embassy there says it opposes any party seeking to strike a deal at its expense, and it opposes any move that disrupts industrial supply chains, vowing to take measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests if necessary. The White House justified the move on national security grounds, stating that the country was, quote, too reliant on foreign sources. The tax varies depending on the drone's size, capabilities, and country of origin. The U.S. also flagged dozens of other trade partners as potential risks in aiding alleged Chinese tariff evasion. Among those named are the EU, India, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and Singapore. The U.S. says it's losing tariff revenue of up to $26 billion annually through illegal transshipment, where goods are sent through a third country with lower tariffs to avoid higher levies. It vows to harness AI to help assess whether a shipment involved such diversions. The FCC had earlier moved to restrict Chinese drone manufacturer DJI Technologies from exporting previously approved models to the U.S. The drone maker accounts for about 70% of the global market. Japan's tourism numbers dipping in the first half of this year compared to the same period last year. That's with a sharp decline in Chinese visitors since Beijing advised citizens against travel to Japan over remarks made by the Japanese Prime Minister over Taiwan. Slightly more than 21 million foreigners visited Japan in the January to June period this year. Now, that's down 2% from 2025 when it was a record. Spending, however, still went up to reach a high of $30.4 billion, up 1.3% on year. The weak yen has helped grow visitorship from South Korea, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, Europe, and the US. That's helped to offset the decline from China. Outbound travel, however, has been falling and remains well below pre-pandemic levels. For the first half of this year, only 6.9 million traveled overseas. For the whole of last year, it was 14.7 million. The weak yen and rising domestic prices weighing on consumers and higher fuel costs have also resulted in surcharges on air tickets. Incheon Airport taking the crown as the world's busiest for international passengers. That's with the Middle East conflict interrupting regular travel patterns in the region, resulting in declining numbers through Dubai. The South Korean hub notching up 38.4 million international passengers in the first 6 months of this year. That's enabled it to overtake London's Heathrow and Singapore's Changi Airport as well. Incheon benefited from the shift to flying between Europe and Asia, rather than transiting through the Gulf. The number of people using the South Korean airport as a connecting point rose by 2/3 during the first half compared to the same period. The K-boom has also helped with a rise in tourism visits to the country. The numbers are still preliminary, according to the Airports Council International, and the final figures will be published next month. And that's all for business. Back to you, Telly.
Oh, thanks so very much for that, Clara. Well, on that note, let's go for another break now. But coming up next on East Asia tonight, the legacy of World War II continues to shape East Asian diplomacy more than 80 years on. We'll be speaking to a historian from the University of Connecticut on why old wounds remain difficult to heal. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Record rainfall triggers deadly floods in Japan's Chiba prefecture, killing at least 8 and knocking out power for thousands of households. Also, a race against rising waters in central China as emergency crew work round the clock to contain a levee breach linked to Typhoon Dolphin. More than 2,000 people have been evacuated to safety. Plus, Taiwan concludes its biggest annual military exercise that focused this year on keeping the island going in times of crisis. More than 8 decades have passed since Japan announced its surrender on 15th of August 1945, putting an end to World War II. Now, countries across East Asia will mark the anniversary tomorrow, but they will likely carry very different meanings. In Japan, it's a day of remembrance for those who died in the war. The emperor and political leaders typically observe a minute's silence at noon. In South Korea, 15th of August is Liberation Day, marking the end of Japanese colonial rule. While in China, memories of the long and devastating war against Japan remain an important part of national commemoration. Just today, the Chinese Defense Ministry said that the truth of history cannot be forgotten and urged Japan to atone for sin and stop the dangerous act of remilitarization. The fighting has long ended, but some of the disputes and grievances associated with the war did not. Just yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited one of 4 islands also claimed by Japan. The Kurils, or Northern Territories, as Tokyo calls it, were seized by Soviet forces at the end of World War II. Japan's prime minister protested the visit, and Tokyo is weighing possible new sanctions on Moscow. Then there is the issue of comfort women forced to provide sexual services for Japanese troops during the war. Tokyo considers the matter legally and diplomatically settled, but many survivors and their supporters say that justice has not been served. Even the way the war is remembered can turn into diplomatic issues. Past visits by Japanese leaders to Tokyo's Yasukuni Shrine, for instance, have drawn repeated protests from both China and South Korea, as the shrine honors Japan's war dead, including 14 convicted Class A war criminals. China's huge domestic market has helped its electric two-wheeler makers scale up and sharpen their technology. But with growth slowing at home, they are now headed overseas. CNA senior correspondent Han Kuang with this report.
Electric two-wheelers, quiet, quick, and sometimes too close for comfort. They are one of the most ordinary sights in Shanghai. On mainland China, registered e-bikes are treated more like bicycles than motorcycles, as long as they meet national standards, including a 25 km/h speed limit. The rules are much stricter in other parts of the world.
That is why for some first-time visitors, these electric two-wheelers can feel like the silent menace. You look left, you look right, and one still comes out of nowhere. But after living here for a while, you stop seeing them as a hazard. You start seeing them as infrastructure.
That infrastructure is what makes urban China feel so fast. A coffee, a snack, a missing ingredient, all can move across the city in minutes. More often than not, by the electric two-wheeler. And they are not just for delivery workers. Sven Weckman from Germany is a manager at a Chinese e-commerce giant. He rides an electric scooter to work.
It's really a good way to get around because it's much faster than, biking, and it's very hot here. And it's also faster than riding a car because during rush hour there's some traffic jams. But with the scooter you just go. You can park anywhere, it's for free, and it's very fast.
Even getting started was low friction.
You go to the shop, apply for it, and it takes maybe 2-3 days. And you pay 200 RMB, which is around $30 US. And boom, you have your license and the license plate, and then you're good to go.
That ease has created a massive market for e-bikes. Estimates show China accounts for more than half of the world's e-bike sales. This gives local makers both the revenue and the impetus to improve to outdo the competition.
They're really big in batteries, so it makes totally sense. And the main issue of a scooter is you need a good battery, right? If you have to charge it every day, it's not convenient. I charge it maybe every 4 days now, and my ride to work and back is 7 kilometers one way.
But with sluggish domestic consumption and a switch to e-bikes mostly completed locally, Chinese e-bike makers are now setting their sights overseas. At this expo in EU, manufacturers are showing off e-bikes customized for different markets.
我们知道不同国家的这个法律规定呢，相对来讲是差别比较大的啊。你像欧盟呢，它的这个法律规定对于这个电动两轮车的这种行驶速度，包括它的这个电机，包括它的这个整车认证，都有这个相对严格的这个设置啊。那比如说这个巴西市场，那它对于整车的这种轴距啊，包括把距啊，包括它的一些这个电工系统的这种要求，也是有不尽相同的这个需求啊。所以这块呢，我们根据不同国家进行相应产品设置的这种配置啊，那以此呢符合本地在这个电动两轮车上牌，同时呢本地化的设置呢也更好的满足我们本地化一些这个环境啊，包括一些这个陡坡地区的国家、干旱地区的国家的这种这个实际使用场景。目前我们的这个产品品质包括质量把控都是非常优秀的，可以满足全世界很多国家的要求。
China's International Business Daily estimates for every 3 e-bikes in the world, at least 2 are made in China. And in Asia, where petrol motorcycles do dominate the roads, the drive to lower pollution and carbon emissions, along with a simmering Middle East oil crisis, are pushing Chinese e-bikes exports to new heights. In the first half of 2026, China Customs says exports of e-bikes rose 31.5%, more than twice the pace of China's overall exports.
The humble electric two-wheeler reflects something important about China's export machinery. The huge market creates scale. Scale creates opportunities to improve the product. Once the product is cheap, practical, and good enough, it travels. So what started out as a silent menace for some in Shanghai has become yet another global export hit for China. Tan Yu-Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
Now, as we've mentioned earlier, it's been more than 80 years after the war ended. So why does the war's legacy continue to exert such influence over diplomacy in East Asia? Well, here to help us unpack more of it, let's bring in Professor Alexis Dudden from the Department of History at the University of Connecticut. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. So first up, perhaps we'll start with the big picture question, the significance of it. Why do you think the war still feels so present in relations between Japan, South Korea, and China, even after more than 80 years?
It was such a devastation. It changed the face of Asia, and including Singapore, including all of Southeast Asia as well. It was a monstrous war that still needs reflection. And the problem that I see is the United States government has allowed the government of Japan to not recognize the horror it caused.
And of course, speaking of that, Japan, though, I mean, they have apologized on a number of occasions for its wartime actions, yet questions of its historical responsibility continue to surface somewhat. And why do you think those apologies, why do you think they haven't brought greater closure?
You are so correct, and that is the best way to put it. Various prime ministers have apologized. There have been issues of atonement, and then the next administration or 2 administrations later throw them back. And so, especially with the issue of the comfort women, to have the Kono statement be questioned, that raised a lot of alarm throughout Asia. The issue of Unit 731, the biological terror unit, which had its branch camp in Singapore, this needs answering. And again, if the Japanese government would just say, we were wrong and stick to it, that would be great.
And also, I mean, Professor, you've talked there about the issue of comfort of women between Japan and South Korea. We've also talked about how sensitive it remains around symbols like the Yasukuni Shrine. But is there a sense that, as the generation that experienced the war passes away, do you think these disputes actually become harder rather than easier to resolve?
That is so beautifully put. Because yes, there is the inheritance of trauma. So when I was teaching in Singapore the last 2 years, I learned from my students what their grandparents had suffered. And so then they take it upon themselves. And yes, it's something that while you're still alive, you could acknowledge. But when you leave it to the next generation or the third generation, it becomes a very different matter. And I wish the government of Japan would deal with the chance it still has. There is still a chance to apologize profusely to the living survivors of horror. And that includes comfort women. It includes so many atrocities. But if they could just acknowledge officially that they invaded Asia and not make a story about it, that would help the next generation, my students' generation.
So, Professor, when we look at how dramatically the strategic landscape around is changing, I'm talking about the changing security environment here, also reshaping the way the region views post-war order and also the historical settlements that underpin it. Tell us, how does that work?
So Japan is not remilitarized. Japan is allowed to have a military according to its constitution. What has changed dramatically in the last year is that Japan now is able to export military equipment. And so for 1947, you do the math for me, whatever Japan has allowed, it's no longer a peace state. It exports weapons.
Now,
and that changes the security situation.
Right. I'm afraid we have lost visuals of Professor Alexis Dudden, but thanks so very much for joining us. There I was talking to Professor Dudden from the Department of History at the University of Connecticut. Our time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, surging interest is driving more teams to take part in the second World Humanoid Robot Games. Plus, more than 2,000 robots from 16 countries are gearing up for the second World Humanoid Robot Games in Beijing next week. That's more than 4 times the number of robots that were involved in last year's inaugural event. From football and high jump to weightlifting and tug of war. Now, these robots are being put through their paces at this training base. More than 600 teams will take part across 51 events this year, almost double the number from last year's edition. The events will test the robot's speed, strength, and precision, as well as their ability to think, move, and stay on their feet. Teams from 16 countries, including the US, Germany, and Japan, are set to compete. And the robots are getting the full athlete treatment as well, with their own village, complete with electronic IDs, storage and repair areas, and of course, plenty of places to recharge. New scenario-based events will also put the robots to work on practical tasks like housekeeping and sorting library books in simulated homes, hotels, and factories. Organizers hope that lessons from the competition can help take robots from the sporting arena into the real world.
It might look like a simple game of table tennis here, but there's actually a lot happening. The robot has to spot the incoming ball, predict where it's going, and time its return, all on its own without anyone controlling it remotely.
我们也是希望能够搭建一个更好的国际间技术交流和合作的平台，未来呢能让更多的国际赛队能够参与到这个运动会。我们也是希望通过运动会能够促进人形机器人产业的迭代升级，能够推动中国人形机器产业的高质量发展。
Rebecca Mateo, who had a sneak peek, she joins us live now from Beijing. So, Rebecca, lucky you. You were given this rare access to see some of these teams ahead of the games. Tell us, how are the teams preparing for their bots?
Well, Otelli, the organizers have opened up the venue for the teams to practice daily leading up to the competition, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. And much like the human athletes, these robots are also clocking in their final rounds of training, testing, troubleshooting, lots of that. So, Otelli, I got to see the football teams as well as the table tennis team in action today. And I must say that I was very fascinated by how far the technology has come, but also more aware of its limitations. Now, the football team, the robot must be able to see the ball, make sense of the environment, and move around the pitch. And I also noticed that from time to time, humans will have to step in. For example, say when the robot gets stuck, it falls, or the ball goes off the pitch. So I noticed that the teams would have to scramble to reposition the robot, as well as simply to just get certain robots off the field. Now, but for the table tennis game, though, I must say that it's a little bit more advanced. So I was playing against one of the robots. I must say that I'm not good at table tennis, so I probably wasn't a good test for it. I believe there's a clip of me playing against the robot. And I noticed that when the robot was playing against another more skillful player, a more proficient player, it stepped up its game. So its return got faster, and also its precision as well. So I think the professor I spoke to told me that they spent about 6 months with a team of 20 to train the robot, using some over 100 hours of data from expert table tennis players. And that's how the robot got that great. And they really need the skills of high-level decision-making as well as reasoning to be able to judge the reaction of their opponent at a high speed. And he said that he's hoping for a win at the games, of course, but ultimately he's hoping to develop a more general-purpose robot. But for now, let's hear how he has been training this one.
The data collected by two expert human players. They play against each other, and then we try to transfer their motions. For example, the human brain's decision making, and also the arms, hands, and legs, how to control the bodies, how to balance, and also make the low-level actions movement in very high speed in the ping pong sport game.
So I also got to speak to some students behind the football teams, and one university team did well last year, brought home medals, and they are back for another shot. There are also a group of high school students, and they're participating in the competition for the first time. Let's have a listen.
我们基本上每天都会来这边训练，就是主要为了适应场地。然后今天的表现的话还算可以，就是还是有一定的失误吧，因为对方的机器人就是有一些问题，就是不能够踢到球。我们就是如果要是更合理的规划一下的话，应该是保持场上一直有2台机器人去进攻，然后这样我们得分的机会会更大一些。
代码里面去找一些问题，再去测试一下，看它哪个问题出了问题。就比如说这次的比赛里面，就是我们机器人平常就是找不到球，我们就会去看它的视觉模块到底是哪出了问题。
So the team, they sound very determined, to win the games. But I mean, essentially, in a nutshell, what does this tell us about China's broader ambitions for humanoid robots?
Well, it's definitely more than a flashy robot spotting event. You can really see the scale of China's push here. There are about 96% of the over 600 teams are from China. They are Chinese teams, and they are from companies, research institutions, as well as universities across the country. Now, the idea is to use the competition as a testing ground for the technology, to put the robots under pressure to see how well they perform, they move, make decisions, as well as complete certain tasks. So this is also in line with China's broader push to move embodied AI from demonstrations to real-world applications. And we see that also in that there are a lot more scenario-based events to test the robot's ability to complete certain very specific tasks like, assembling tools, picking up bins using tweezers. So that's really just one aspect. Another aspect is really the commercial part. So a good showing could translate positively for the company's profile in the industry, their financing prospects, as well as even the valuation, Otelli.
All right, many thanks for that report. Thanks very much, Rebecca Mateo, speaking to us from Beijing. Now, before we go, we are going to be taking you to Brussels' iconic Grand Place, where it has been transformed into a giant canvas, where thousands of dahlia flowers have been used to recreate the Great Wave of Kanagawa, a famous 19th century work by the Japanese artist Hakusai. William Denslow has this report for us from Brussels.
Grand Place is one of Brussels' most iconic sites, and it has been transformed, a transformation that took a little over 5 hours. More than 100 volunteers gathered at around 7 a.m. local time Thursday to begin putting the final pieces together. But it's a process that took far longer than that. Organisers say that it was an idea that's really taken 2 years nearly to come to fruition. Visitors coming here to Grand Place say it's certainly worth the wait.
I really appreciate it. I'm grateful.
I think it's really nice. I mean, looks good. The place is really nice.
Amazing. Yeah, wonderful. I mean, flowers are still fresh.
I've never seen anything like it. I think it's incredible. It's beautiful.
This depiction of the Great Wave of Kanagawa is comprised of roughly 750,000 dahlias. Now, this event coincides with another heat wave blanketing Belgium with more extreme temperatures. But organisers tell me that these dahlias come from parts of South America, that they are resilient to the heat. They are confident that even those coming on Sunday, the last day of this exhibition, will still be treated to the vibrant colours you can see behind me.
It's a plant which needs sun and heat to grow beautiful flowers. So people from Lunau who brings the flowers here said it's one of the best years for the flowers.
From 1986, this flower carpet exhibition has been put on every 2 years. It really has blossomed in popularity, attracting people from the world over. The theme of this year is fostering bilateral ties between Belgium and Japan, as the two countries are marking 160 years of diplomatic ties. For CNA, I'm William Denslow in Brussels.
And on that note, we wrap up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Have a great weekend. See you again next week.